On October 8, 1781, 7 hours into a chase off the mouth of the Delaware Bay, a 32-gun British frigate finally ran down a small American privateer carrying less than a third of her firepower. Aboard the American ship was a 15-year-old black gunpowder boy. Under the standing practice of the Royal Navy in 1781, boys who looked like him were almost never exchanged as prisoners of war. They were shipped to the West Indies and sold into slavery. What happened to this one instead was decided by a game of marbles. And the boy who walked away from that game would spend the next 60 years building the sails that powered America's fastest ships, and become one of the richest men in Philadelphia, black or white. In 1781, the American Revolution was not yet a story with a guaranteed ending. Philadelphia had spent a year under British occupation only 3 years earlier. The Continental Navy barely existed, a handful of ships against the largest fleet on Earth. So Congress did what a nation without a navy does. It licensed private citizens to go raid the enemy's shipping for profit. Nearly 1,700 privateer vessels sailed under American commission during the war. Almost a quarter of them came out of Philadelphia alone. Privateering was not a side story of the Revolution. It was a large piece of how the war got fought. Privateers captured over 2,283 British ships across the conflict, more than 10 times what the entire Continental Navy managed on its own. But the Royal Navy captured roughly 1,300 American privateers right back. This was not a safe trade. It was a lottery with your life as the stake. And for a black sailor, the odds were worse than for anyone else on the ship. That is the world a 14-year-old boy walked into when he signed onto a 22-gun privateer called the Royal Louis, commanded by a Philadelphia captain named Stephen Decatur Sr., one of only about 20 African Americans among the ship's 200-man crew. His name was James Forten, and he had no military training whatsoever. What he had was something the war didn't know it needed yet. James Forten was not raised to be a soldier. He was raised inside a sail loft. His father, Thomas Forten, was a journeyman sailmaker on Philadelphia's waterfront. A free black man in a country where the overwhelming majority of people who looked like him were enslaved. James's family had been free for 3 generations, going back to a great-grandfather who had arrived in America in chains, and a grandfather who had bought his own freedom. That made the Fortens a rarity, and James grew up walking distance from the wharves, sweeping the floor of Robert Bridges's sail loft so the canvas wouldn't drag through dust and grit, picking up scraps of leftover cloth, stirring a kettle of turpentine, tallow, and beeswax used to waterproof the thread that held a ship's sails together. Then, when James was somewhere around 7 or 9, accounts differ on the exact age, his father drowned. The family story says he fell from a height near the water. Whatever happened, it left James, his mother, and his older sister without their main income. He left school at 9 to work full-time, chimney sweep first, then grocery clerk. His formal education stopped there. His education in sailcloth, rigging, and how wind actually behaves against canvas, that kept going every single day, whether anyone called it school or not. That knowledge is what got him a spot on the Royal Louis in 1780. Not muscle, not connections, a trade skill that most of the crew, black or white, simply didn't have. His first cruise went well. The Royal Louis teamed up with another privateer and took 4 prizes together, then helped capture a Royal Navy sloop. James came home with prize money in his pocket, and according to his own later account, watched black militia companies march through Philadelphia's streets, men he later called as brave men as ever fought. He was 15, flush with cash, and convinced the country's promises applied to him too. So he signed up for a second cruise. There was no battle plan here. There was something arguably harder to survive: a system, and a 9-hour window in which several strangers had to make several small decisions, any one of which could have ended James Fortin's life in slavery instead of freedom. Start with the ground, in this case, water. The Royal Lewis set out from the Delaware Bay in October 1781 into waters the British Navy controlled almost completely. 2 Royal Navy warships were cruising those exact waters that week: HMS Amphion, a 679-ton, 32-gun fifth-rate frigate under Captain John Bazley, and HMS Nymph, a 36-gun frigate under Captain John Ford. Between them, they outgunned the Royal Lewis more than 3-1. Now picture the moment from the deck of the Amphion. At 11:30 in the morning, the British master, William Morris Jr., logged it in his own hand. Gain on her very fast, 11:30, fired a shot at the chase. The Royal Lewis first hoisted false French colors, then switched to American colors and returned fire from her stern gun. It didn't matter. The Amphion carried more sail, and over 7 hours she closed the gap. By early afternoon, Morris recorded the outcome in 4 flat words: upon which she struck. That's layer 1 of the trap Fortin had unknowingly sailed into. Not a trap the British built, but the trap of being a black sailor captured by the British Navy in 1781. Because here is what almost every account skips: capture wasn't the dangerous part. What happened next was. James Fortin later said it himself. Reportedly, rarely were prisoners of his complexion exchanged. They were sent to the West Indies, and there doomed to a life of slavery. He knew exactly what capture usually meant for someone who looked like him. This was not a boy naive about the stakes. This was a boy who understood the odds and sailed anyway. Captain Bazley had brought his own 2 sons along on this cruise, a 14-year-old midshipman already used to shipboard life, and a 12-year-old named Henry making his very first voyage. Henry was, by one account, a nuisance, bored, restless, with nothing to occupy him. Bazley needed someone to keep him busy. He couldn't spare one of his own sailors for the job, so he looked at his new prisoners. He picked Fortin, reportedly for his honest and open countenance. Fortin and Henry became fast companions, and it was a game of marbles that sealed it. Fortin was good enough that Henry bragged about it to his father, and Bazley asked to see the boy repeat the feat himself. That's the moment the whole plan, if you can call an accident of boredom a plan, clicks into place. Bazley was no longer looking at cargo. He was looking at a specific, literate, likable boy he had grown genuinely fond of. And so he made an offer nobody expects a wartime captor to make. Come to England with Henry, get an education there, live free as a British subject. James Fortin said no. Captain John Bazley was not a cruel man by the standards of his service, and he was not careless. Weeks earlier, his ship had taken part in the burning of New London, Connecticut. In the British Navy's working assumptions of 1781, a captured black sailor from an American privateer was, functionally, disposable property to be processed and forgotten, sent along with the rest of the crew, most likely destined for a life of enslaved labor in the Caribbean sugar economy that fed half the empire's wealth. He saw exactly what he expected to see when Fortin was first brought aboard. One more captured hand among dozens. Then his own son's boredom put that assumption to the test. And what Bazley found, the longer he actually spent around this particular 15-year-old, was a boy who was literate, quick-witted, personally likable, and, when directly offered an escape from everything he was risking, flatly unwilling to trade his loyalty for his own freedom. He saw exactly what James Fortin wanted him to see, a young man worth keeping his word to. This was a gift. Bazley couldn't simply free him. Fortin refused that offer too, on principle. So instead, the captain did the next best thing available to him. He wrote a personal letter to the commandant of the prison ships in New York Harbor, asking that this particular prisoner not be forgotten when the time came for exchange. That letter is the entire reason James Fortin's story doesn't end on a slave ship. It is the evening of October 23, 1781. James Fortin steps off a British transport and onto the deck of the prison ship Jersey, anchored in Wallabout Bay off Brooklyn. A guard enters his name into the muster book. He becomes prisoner number 4102. The Jersey is not a warship anymore. She is a rotting hulk, stripped of her rigging, packed with hundreds of American prisoners below decks in conditions that breed smallpox and dysentery. Men die aboard her by the dozens, week after week. Historians estimate more than 11,500 Americans die on British prison ships in New York Harbor over the course of the war, more than fell in every land battle of the Revolution combined. Fortin goes below. He has 7 months ahead of him. He does not know, in this moment, that Baisley's letter is already sitting with the prison commandant, flagged for early exchange. He does not know that the ordinary sentence for a black prisoner, quiet transfer to a slave ship bound for the Indies, has already been quietly rerouted around him by one captain's handwritten request. All he knows is hunger, sickness, and the sound of other men dying around him through a New York winter. Spring comes. His name moves up the exchange list. He is released in 1782 and put ashore, alone, in a city he doesn't know, with no money and no clear way home. He crosses the Hudson River. He walks, barefoot for part of the way, until a stranger takes pity and gives him shoes. From Brooklyn toward Trenton, and from Trenton toward Philadelphia. When he finally reaches his mother's door, he is 15 years old, gaunt, ragged, and nearly bald from illness. He is also, against every statistical likelihood the war offered a black teenager in his position, still free. More than 11,500 Americans died aboard British prison ships in New York Harbor during the Revolution. James Fortin survived 7 months on the worst of them, the Jersey, and walked off it alive. Those numbers are almost absurd next to what came after. By the time he died in 1842, Fortin had built a fortune historians estimate at roughly $100,000, and by some accounts, when real estate and stock holdings are counted, as much as $300,000. He ran a sale loft with as many as 40 employees, roughly half black and half white, at a time when almost no black-owned business in America employed white workers at all. That's not a rags to riches footnote. That's one of the wealthiest men in Philadelphia. Full stop. No racial qualifier needed. Who started as prisoner number 4102 on a ship where most men his age simply died. James Fortin did not survive the Revolution by being the toughest person on the Royal Lewis, or the bravest. He survived because him, a form of value nobody could fully take away. A trade skill so specific and so useful that it kept opening doors that his race, under the law of the time, was supposed to keep shut. Fortin turned a childhood tragedy, his father's early death, the loss of formal schooling, into an apprenticeship the war couldn't erase and slavery couldn't easily absorb. Bridges needed a foreman who understood canvas and rigging better than anyone else in the loft. The British Navy, even at its cruelest, still needed prisoners who could be useful rather than simply disposed of. Every single gatekeeper Fortin encountered, Baisley, Bridges, the merchants and ship owners of Philadelphia's waterfront, ultimately made their decision about him based on what he could actually do, not what the law said he was allowed to be. There's a real parallel here in Olaudah Equiano, a formerly enslaved sailor working the same Atlantic trade routes a few years earlier, who converted hard-won maritime skill and literacy into personal freedom, and then into a best-selling abolitionist memoir that helped move British public opinion toward ending the slave trade in 1807. The comparison holds where it matters most. Both men treated a rare, hard-to-exclude-them-from-trade skill as the lever that outweighed the law. It breaks down in one important place. Equiano bought his own freedom out of actual enslavement. Fortin was born free and was fighting his whole life to make sure the country actually meant it. Fortin's decades as a master sailmaker rippled well beyond his own loft, reportedly found their way onto the heavy frigates of the era, the same class of Philadelphia-built warships that would go on to carry the young United States Navy through the War of 1812. A black teenager who once ran gunpowder below decks on a doomed privateer spent the rest of his working life helping equip the ships of the Navy that eventually replaced privateering altogether. The ripple went further than sailcloth. By his 40s, Fortin's wealth and standing led him become one of the most influential black civic leaders in the country. In 1813, he published Letters from a Man of Color, a pamphlet that helped defeat a Pennsylvania bill requiring black newcomers to register with the state. He personally helped bankroll William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, The Liberator. In 1812, alongside Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, he helped mobilize more than 2,000 black Philadelphians to build defensive fortifications when the city itself was under threat. None of that happens without a game of marbles in 1781. Psychologically, Fortin's rise changed what a whole generation of free black Philadelphians believed was achievable. Not through comfortable assimilation, but through open, integrated, undeniable success that white Philadelphia could not simply wave away. James Fortin died at home in Philadelphia on March 4, 1842, after a year-long illness at 75 years old. Thousands of mourners, black and white, turned out for his funeral, among the largest the city had seen since Benjamin Franklin's. If this kind of historical breakdown is your thing, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We have more forgotten stories like this to tell, and they only get more remarkable from here.